Welcome back to our Check Call community segment here. Mary O'Connell dancing along to the music as we get to her as well. Mary, thanks so much for joining us. And we had Zach and Craig Fuller, of course, do their State of Freight webinar yesterday. And you've kind of got a little bit of a State of Freight segment here coming up with Check Call in terms of kind of an overall look at the freight industry, certainly from a 3PL perspective. General conclusions, where do you think we're at right now?
I mean, pretty much I have to 100% echo everything that we talked about yesterday in the State of Freight. We did kind of our own take on it, and, we just kind of chatted about, what we can expect for the 3PL side of things, because obviously the transportation market as a whole is very important to know about, but then also, to really understand kind of how that will directly affect, your shippers, your carriers, and then the 3PL market as a whole. So we kind of dug into that pretty deep today. And the general consensus is, it's gonna be pretty bleak for a couple more months, which is not the update that anyone wants. That's not the news that anybody wants to have happen. Everybody would ideally like that. Oh, tomorrow volumes are going to return. We're going to have all of this crazy demand, but unfortunately that is not the case. So pretty much it's going to be more of the same as we ride out this year. And then we can also expect that very typical January, February lull that happens for most industries. Obviously, certain shippers, this is the beginning of their peak season, and some shippers have peak season around January and February. So this is where that diversification of those shippers that you have at your company is really, really important.
And Mary, as we kind of look at where we are now, when we were to say rewind, ask Clarissa the same question, and John Kingston looking at where we're going, are there any surprises that are really occurring to you right now in this fourth quarter that would have shocked you if you were to really be asked what your expectations were maybe 6 months ago?
So actually, if you go back to an old episode of Check Call from around December of last year, it's Grace Thomas and I, and we make some hot takes. We make some predictions for 2023. And unfortunately, some of our wild and crazy things that we didn't think were going to happen, but, we could see how maybe it would happen, is happening. Now, I will say that there is significantly higher amount of bankruptcies and, companies shuttering their doors, which is something that I didn't predict because honestly, I don't like predicting that. It feels like the bad thing to do, but we are starting to see a lot more of that. And I think, unfortunately, that is something that is just, it's the nature of this business. It's the nature of the down market, especially everyone who might not be as familiar with the transportation industry, who maybe got in as a freight broker when in 2020, 2021, when you could just easily print money. That sometimes that lack of experience that comes with it, unfortunately, doesn't always lead to the most successful endeavors during a down market. So it's something that is really important to kind of remember that, we have some people coming in that maybe don't know, that aren't familiar with the ups and downs and the cyclical nature of the transportation industry. So that one is definitely catching me off guard. It's just the sheer amount of companies that are facing, potentially going out of business because it's transportation. There's always going to be a down market when you have a super high.
So Mary, a little bit later on, we've got the roundtable coming up, and one of the questions I want to ask is basically looking at peak season right now kind of being mild by most prognostications, and of course going into January, which is usually never good for freight month as a whole. Looking into your crystal ball at this particular point, what are you seeing as far as peak season, November, December, and how this could possibly play out as we get into Q1 2024?
So peak season is expected to be by all definitions relatively mild. However, that is something that we don't want to necessarily just throw out there and then kind of treat it like it is kind of weak season, more or less. It's something that we've seen going around on the internet is people calling it weak season. The peak season this year will be stronger than it was last year. There will be a slightly more demand. However, it's not going to be a traditional peak season by any stretch of the imagination. So while it is expected to be mild, it is very important to keep in mind that, there is some demand there, and we have to stay on top of that because you don't want to just be caught sleeping. And then suddenly, you're dropping loads. You're not servicing your customer how you should be. That's something to keep in mind because customers are coming with these expectations that their carriers or that their carrier partners and their 3PL and their transportation providers, they are coming that, because there is such little demand and there is not as much out there in the market, they want that service that they've grown to expect over the last few months and years. So by thinking that peak season is going to in fact be weak or mild, that's something that is kind of misleading because there is still that demand there for those customers. It's just a matter of making sure that you stay on top of it so that way you're not also seen as weak for weak season.
And Mary, of course, we're talking check calls, so can you give us a preview or tell us about your upcoming episode here?
Yeah, so today we are having a lovely David Spencer from Arrive. We're doing a little market update. We're kind of feeling out a bunch of different conditions and kind of what we can expect rates to do. We've focused pretty heavily on our rate forecast this week, so we're going to do that, and it's going to be a great time. Just keep watching FreightWaves TV and you'll stumble upon Check Call.
One more before we let you go here. What do you think are going to be the big market indicators, you're going to be looking at over the course of the next several months in terms of how this freight market could play itself out in terms of demand, not only demand, but also rejection rates, things of that nature that may say, hey, you know what, we may be pulling out of this, or unfortunately, we might not be pulling out of this for a while?
I mean, outbound tender rejections are always a pretty good indicator for any market that will say, hey, capacity is starting to tighten. And that's usually that early indicator that something could change pretty quickly. So I would just say, keep an eye on your outbound tender rejections, keep an eye on your volumes, just kind of keep an eye on some of those big freight markets because as they start increasing volume, you can expect the markets surrounding them to start increasing as well.
Gotcha.
And of course, you just mentioned your upcoming Check Call episode. If people are just clamoring to be on your show, want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Well, you can find us, or not us, you can find me on Twitter at Mario_119, or you can subscribe to Check Call on FreightWaves.com/Check Call. You can find me on LinkedIn. Those DMs are always open, so just slide on in.
Dressed appropriately, as always. Mary O'Connell, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Right now, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.